Plasticine clay, also known as Sculpey, is to the left side of the sink in the classroom under the counter. There should be labels helping you locate it. The inside of the cabinet is also labeled so you will know where to get things and where to put them back when you're finished working. This is an image of the Sculpey clay box. You can see individual colors are wrapped in separate baggies so the colors stay separated. Please make sure that you use all your marbled clay or separate the colors once you are done working.
When you're done, you have to put the Sculpey in a plastic Ziploc bag, roll all the air out of it, and then you actually have to close the bag to make sure there's no air in it, because the more the air gets at the oil in the Sculpey clay, the less it's going to work. Regardless of what you're making, you're going to have to take the Sculpey out of the package, and it's a little bit stiff to begin with, so you're going to have to take it in your hands and get it warmed up, because what we're going to need to do is we're going to have to roll it out in order to do some of the processes that we're going to do. So I'm just going to get this warmed up so that I can roll it out. Once I've done that, I'm actually going to roll it into a little bit of what I would consider a log or a hot dog. For this technique, you're actually going to have to take a coil of clay, and in order to roll it evenly, you really want to push with the palm part of your hand, and you're going to push down and roll outward in order to get the coil to really make a really nice long coil as you're doing this. So I just rolled that one out, and what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to have several coils to put together so that I can make my marbled clay. So here I have a couple coils of clay. I'm going to cut them in half.
I put them back together in a random order and twisted them randomly as well in order to start the marbling process.
I'm just taking my hands and squishing that all together. You saw I kind of twisted it in different directions. Then what I'm going to do is roll this out again. And I'm getting some marbling, but I'm going to do that a couple of times so that I get a lot of intricate marbling going on, because that'll be more interesting in my jewelry. So I can already see there's going to be some really cool marbling going on in here. I'm going to just make this into a square so that I can roll it out and actually make the jewelry out of it.
To roll out the clay, it will take some effort to roll the clay out with the smaller rollers we have in the classroom. Make sure you put the spacer sticks on either side to keep the clay even. I put the clay on a wax paper covered sheet of mat board. I would suggest taping this to the table as well so it doesn't move. I didn't do that, so there are points in this video where you'll see me struggle because of that.
Here's another thing you guys should notice. There's like a little air bubble right here in this piece of clay that I can see, and there might be a couple of other ones. I'm just going to feel around a little bit to see if I can find any air bubbles. I don't really want that in there. So I'm just going to push that down, kind of smooth it out. Doesn't really matter because the clay is marbled anyway. I think what I'm going to do though is peel it off just to make sure that I have the backside smooth before I actually start to cut out the pieces of jewelry. I actually think that the backside looked a little bit nicer. I'm really glad that I peeled it off. So what I'm going to do is just select a bunch of different cutters, and I'm going to cut this all up into different pieces so that you can see I'm going to use as much of that as possible.
I started cutting out the marbled clay with the pendant and earring cutters that are available in the room. I also took a can of silicone spray to make it easier to use the cutters. Sometimes the cutters would stick to the clay, so I'd have to use a pencil eraser to push the clay out of the cutter. This would sometimes leave a mark that I would have to smooth out with my finger. Notice that some of the cutters are also already metal pendant shapes with bails. Those are the easiest to use because all you have to do upon firing the clay is cover them with epoxy and add the findings to make them functional for sale.
I'm going to take a fettling knife and carve out around these. Again, I can peel that apart just as if I was making cutout cookies. So as you can see, I got most of mine loose. I am going to have to pull these out of here. I'm also going to have to clean up all of the bezels in order to actually finish making the jewelry. And not only do I have to clean them up, I'll have to bake them as well, and then I can put my findings on so that I have my finished jewelry. Here's another pendant that I have, and I could actually take the ball of clay that I have, and I'm actually using it to rub on the sides to get as much of the clay off of there as possible. I do also want to rub this edge smooth so you can see where there's kind of a lip on it. I need to take my finger and kind of rub that smooth, and once it's smooth, then I'm going to have to go back and clean up anywhere there's leftover clay on there. And I definitely don't want to get it on the front. So I do need to be careful of that. And again, I'm just using the piece of clay itself to kind of rub, and I'm also rubbing with my fingers in order to make everything as clean as I can possibly get it.
It's also important to keep them as flat as you can so you can apply the epoxy that makes them shiny. If you don't make them flat, the epoxy will drip off the piece. Here is an example of one that did that, so you remember to make your work level with the bezel cutter. You can always go back and trim them with an X-Acto knife, but that takes a lot more effort. You will also have to fill any holes that happened from them not being level, so it's just a good idea to try to keep them as level as possible from the beginning. The first version of marbled clay was light blue and white, which was very subtle. It's strongly recommended that you use two colors that are more contrasted to each other, such as the white and purple you see here, because the overall marbling effect will be easier for a customer to see. I used the cutters and hole cutters with this version so you can see the difference between the more finely crafted pieces already in bezels and the version with holes cut into clay. The last version of marbling clay was a darker blue clay, which I rolled out and painted with phthalo blue paint on one side. When the paint was dry, I cut the clay up into small cubes. I then peeled them apart and glued them together with the Sculpey glue. I also added metal flakes, so the overall effect in the marbling would be one with metallic streaks in it. I then rolled out the pieces and cut them into shapes with the cutters. These pieces will be used to create bezel jewelry later. Please note that I continued to use all the marbled clay until there was no more left, so I didn't create contaminated clay that no one else could use. It's really important to be considerate in your use of materials because we are in a classroom environment. Now that you know about marbling clay, you can go start creating some pendants and earrings.